I think it really started with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Cole Durham at the time was the secretary of the American Society of Comparative Law, and he spent that summer traveling through Eastern Europe, I think on a Eurail pass, and he knocked on the doors of ministries, and the secret was for the Communist Party, the secretary is the big boss. And when he handed them his card offering to be of help as a comparative constitutional law scholar, they were very eager. And soon he found himself with many opportunities to help with law reform projects all across Eastern Europe.
Because on the card, it explained that he was secretary of the American Society of Comparative Law. So not that glamorous of an occupation or responsibility here in the US, but it certainly sounded good. Got him in some doors. So.
And then he became a part of a council of experts on the OSCE, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. And as part of that group, there was a number of opportunities to provide expert help, drafting laws, responding to draft laws that were problematic. And it was a group of people from all over Europe, and getting to know the experts on that council in a way became the core group of experts that became Cole's colleagues that are still his friends 40, even 50 years later.
And Cole also, in the early days, coordinated with other people, heard that a few Russians and Ukrainians were going to be in the United States for a couple of weeks, and just arranged for them to come out to BYU and put together a short conference on the spur of the moment, invited other American experts, and that's what became our big symposium. It just started with maybe a dozen people, mostly from Russia and Ukraine.
And the symposium is our signature event. This October we'll hold our 32nd annual symposium. And this year we celebrate the 25th year of the center's existence. So the symposium actually predates the creation of the center by, more than half a decade.
And the center was opened in 2000. Cole always talks about it as an auspicious date, January 1st, 2000. So that's when the money kicked in. And I had been a student of Cole's before and worked with him on some of these early conferences. And so then at that point, he reached out to me and asked me if I would come and help him start a center. And so it started out with just the two of us in these little tiny offices, with a couple research assistants, madly trying to keep up with invitations and opportunities. But now I look back and it's nothing compared to what we're able to do now, but it really was phenomenal that we were able to build on Cole's work, that the university administration trusted him and saw the good work he was doing and was willing to give them some bridge funding so that we could start a center.
And at that point, I was a law professor at BYU. I had started in 1997, but I was not an employee of the center. I'm still not an employee of the center. I'm really a volunteer. I'm a full-time law professor, and as part of my service obligations to the law school, I serve as director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, and I get a little teaching reduction for my service as director of the center.
Oh, there's several things that make the center unique. One thing is its focus. There aren't other American law schools that have as comprehensive a focus on international law and religion, international religious freedom issues. There are a few small ones. There's more now than there were 25 years ago. And there's a few in Europe that I'm aware of that some of them modeled themselves after us. But we've grown and been able to do things because of the support of wonderful people, because of fabulous students who, because of their life experiences, they speak a number of languages, and so that's been a huge resource when we've hosted conferences or organized conferences elsewhere. And so it gives us a leg up to be able to have more opportunities and be able to connect with more people.
Yeah, what Elizabeth says is exactly right. Built into the very DNA of the center is the international law and the comparative law perspective. Cole's work began as a comparativist and as an international law scholar. And from the very beginning, the very first conference that Cole organized in the field of law and religion, it was an international law conference with scholars from a variety of countries. And today, our signature event is the annual symposium, which today brings about 100 delegates from 50 different countries. Typically, we'll have interpretation into at least a dozen languages. And in addition to that, we organize about a dozen regional conferences every year around the world. And in addition to that, we have teaching programs, and we support other conferences and attend other conferences around the world. And so really the most distinctive thing about the International Center for Law and Religion Studies is that very first word, international. It is really what sets us apart, and it's really the primary focus of who we are.
Well, I think in connection with that is this idea of service. I think Cole embodied that early on, this sense of he went out there to serve. He didn't come in to these offices he went into in Eastern Europe and insist that people listen to him, but he listened to them and tried to be helpful and supportive. And that started a tradition of law reform, that now we've done law reform work in over 50 countries, working with national governments, with US governments, with USAID, with all kinds of NGOs. Opportunities that have come as we've built trust and been able to build relationships. I think that there's many centers that publish, and we publish too. We want strong academic materials and credentials. That's an important part of lifting the field, but so much also is a way to serve. It's a way to bring people together who are concerned about these issues, about a way of trying to improve laws throughout the world.
I think the truth is it's hard, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes humility. We travel a lot. We spend more time listening than we do talking, and we try to collaborate. Virtually everything we do, we try to do with partners, and we try to do it with the best people that we can find in the various countries where we try to work. And it's that spirit of collaboration and that spirit of working together that I think is the most important key to success in working internationally.
Absolutely. I've learned so much from my colleagues around the world. I'm so grateful for the opportunities to learn from them. I mean, we've had experience, both of us, living abroad and learning languages, but the world is an enormous place. And to be able to have partners who are willing to be patient with us and teach us and let us bring what we have to offer and to work together, it's been just really an incredible opportunity. I mean, American law is different just in terms of systems, right? American's a common law system along with the UK and India, but most other countries are civil law systems. But I think beyond that, one thing that I've heard from international lawyers is that American lawyers often bring a certain brand of creativity to solving problems just because of the way the legal training goes in the United States. You're supposed to think on your feet. You're supposed to think outside the box. And so that's something that we can bring, I think. And over time, we develop a reservoir of knowledge and ideas. I'm asked to work on a draft law in Cambodia, and I can bring my experience on a draft law in Mongolia or a draft law in Uzbekistan. And so it builds, but it's always a process of learning.
I think the most important thing is to remain genuinely focused on the principles involved. If you focus on the human rights basis for freedom of religion and belief, and if you focus on the foundational principles, we spend a lot of time focused on human dignity, for example, as the foundational principle for not just religious freedom, but for human rights in general. And in addition to that, if you stand up for not the religious freedom of this group or that group, but for all people in all places at all times, then you can overcome some of the problems of politicization. The real important thing is to stand up for the principle and to stand up for it in all contexts and in all places, and to be aware of the problems of politicization and to be really careful to be principled and to be aligned with principle. And even then it's difficult. But if you're not aligned with principle, then it's going to be really impossible.
I think it's been enormously more politicized now than it was back then. I mean, in the US context particularly, you look back on the International Religious Freedom Act. It was passed during Bill Clinton's presidency almost unanimously. He signed it. It wasn't a partisan issue. Now, with the increasing partisanship of life in America, religious freedom sometimes gets thrown around as a political football. And I think that's something that we've made a really conscious effort to try and avoid, is let's focus on things that we can agree on, places we can bring people together to, ways we can advance the principle, as Brett said, right? We can focus on human dignity of all people, the rights of all people in all places.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we've found human dignity to be so important is because there are places where human rights in general have become politicized and where religious freedom has become politicized. And stepping back and focusing on human dignity for everyone everywhere is a way of finding entry points into discourse that is a little bit less threatening and a little bit less political than freedom of religion can be, certainly in more conservative societies, in Muslim-majority countries, but also in places where people feel that human rights have been used as a weapon, or places where people feel that human rights have been used inconsistently, where they've been used as bludgeons against people you're trying to criticize, but maybe not used against your friends or those whose political cooperation you need. And so the problem of politicization is a big problem, and it doesn't apply just to freedom of religion and belief. It also applies to human rights more broadly. And I think this is something that the human rights community is really grappling with broadly, and it's something that the religious freedom community is also grappling with more specifically.
Well, and I think that some of this also ties back to the earlier discussion we had about humility, right? In some parts of the world, religious freedom brings echoes of colonialism, and we're Americans, and so coming into those situations, it's easy for it to be very fraught, and we just have to keep going back to the fact that we're here to learn, we're here to serve, we want to support the leaders in these countries to be able to decide what's best for them and to be a resource, but to avoid some of the the threatening feeling that often comes for people when they discuss this.
We had an interesting experience at a conference in Mexico recently where we invited some indigenous religious leaders to participate, and they've often been left out of conversations involving religious freedom. And at the end of the conference, one of our representatives was paid what I thought was really a beautiful compliment. And the indigenous leader said, "I've really appreciated this conference because you have been standing up for people who have not always stood up for you." And I thought to myself, you know what? That's about as nice a compliment as we could have been paid. And that's what we want to be doing. We want to be standing up for everyone. And it doesn't matter whether others have always stood up for us or not. There are people who've stood up for us when we have been weak and we have been vulnerable. By we, I mean members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And there have been friends who have stood by us at times when we've been really vulnerable and when we've been persecuted. And so we know what it feels like to be persecuted, and we also know what it feels like to have people who have stood by and stood up for us at times of genuine need. And if we can do that and be that for others, that's really deeply meaningful for us. Well, the center is very small. We're a half dozen people, and we're at a small law school with about 350 students. And we're at a large university of about 35,000 students. And that's a really good place to be, because a small law school at a big university has a lot of strength, because most law schools get at least half their students from their university. And so we are in a position to be pretty selective in the students that we get. And in addition to that, because we are sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have an additional source of strength, because we have a pool of students that come from all over the country and all over the world. And we also have a sponsoring institution that cares deeply about religious freedom. And so the truth is, there's no platform from which it would be easier for us to accomplish our mission of striving to promote religious freedom for all people in all places than from exactly where we are. Because we are a small center at a small law school at a large university, sponsored by a church that cares deeply about the very specific issue that is at the heart of our mission.
Well, and I think that, as Brett explains, this is an issue that resonates very deeply for Latter-day Saints. We see that with people who donate to the center. We see it with church leadership we work with students. There's enormous support, not just enormous support, but enormous support for us standing up for people of all faiths, right? It's not hard for a religion to want to stand up for itself, and it's understandable and necessary. But we're just so grateful for an outpouring of support at all levels for being able to try and be who we are, to be able to really be of service to people worldwide and care about religious freedom of everyone. Well, I think it's a fabulous connection. I've seen this over and over again, not just with our big symposium, but also at regional conferences we've done. I mean, this is just, in some ways, it's like a magic recipe, because what you're doing is bringing all the stakeholders on religious freedom issues together, right? You bring in the religious leaders who are going to be directly affected. You get the government officials who have to reflect the needs and responsibilities of the government and people as a whole. You're bringing academics who can share best practices, how things are done elsewhere, sort of open different perspectives that sometimes within a country we don't get. And so over and over again, we've found that being able to bring together people from international organizations, from NGOs, that these are all people who care deeply about these issues, and they all have something to learn and all have something to give.
And the other thing we find is they're not people who often talk to each other. And so when you add the international dimension, you can actually have really generative conversations where people are actually listening and learning quite a lot. And so we find that by bringing together these different groups and by bringing together them in a genuinely international setting, there's a lot of surprises that people experience and a lot of learning that takes place. And we constantly get feedback from people about how grateful they are for hearing voices and having perspectives that they've never really encountered before. And so it's actually something we've become very intentional about, is bringing together people from these very different walks of life and bringing them into conversation. And not just conversation, but into proximity with each other.
Well, just to give an example, this is only a slight example because there's so many more that could be given, but I was involved with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and as being part of an international organization, Jehovah's Witnesses in one European state reached out and had some concerns about the way they were being treated. And we had just had our fall conference where we had the leader of the interfaith group from that very country come. And so I said, asked them, can I put you in touch with each other? They were both happy. And it led to a solution, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of helping people make the connections they need to make. And I mean, we're humans, right? We all tend to stay in our own bubbles, and it's so easy to do. I'm an academic, I interact with other academics, we reinforce each other, we learn from each other, but we don't get outside it. But when we start getting outside it, there's just so much good that can be done.
There are times when engagement is futile. Our inclination is usually to err on the side of engagement. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's tentative, sometimes it's frustrating and disappointing. But we have found that attributing goodwill to people and good faith to people generally is better than having litmus tests for engagement. And so we try to be cautious, we try to be quiet, we try to be just low-key in some of the ways in which we try to engage. We try not to, put ourselves in very public situations where we can be used for propaganda. But we do, I think, err on the side of trying to talk with people and try to engage with people and try to get to know them and to hope for the best. And the truth is, people usually don't want to engage if they're not interested in doing something meaningful and real. So for the most part, we haven't found ourselves in situations where we have felt that engagement has been a big mistake. On top of that, we work for a university that's cautious with its travel policies, and there are a lot of places we just can't go and things we can't do. And so, we're relatively cautious in putting ourselves in situations that are dangerous or that bring sort of moral hazard.
Well, we believe in long-term engagement with people, and there's some scholars who've explained why that works. That for countries at different stages in sort of the progress towards a more ample human rights regime, a stronger rule of law program, there's different types of activities that can make the most difference. But for a lot of areas where that transition is just beginning to happen, groups like ours that focus on sort of knowledge base, have some practical value to offer, can be engaged with a country. And even if initially representatives of that country are there just for show, the research shows that engaging them over and over again forces them to start being able to describe things with more specificity, to be able to use the standards and terms that you're explaining. And so that what initially became just sort of a superficial, show up and talk at each other kind of event, turns into a real discussion of real problems. And so will be disagreements. I'm not saying that we have all the answers for every country in the world, but there is a way that we've seen where you build trust over time, you take it slow, be quiet, we're not out to make headlines, we just want to be able to be of support to countries, to individuals trying to have more knowledge and be able to tap into international groups that deal with these issues.
Well, I think the important thing is to take a long-term view and to not imagine that it's all about you. We work hard in places like Russia, we've worked hard in places like China, and we don't know the end of the story in either of those places, and I wouldn't say that we know whether these are success stories or stories of failure. We just know that they're stories that are ongoing, and so we'll keep trying and we'll keep doing what we can in ways that make sense, and we won't give up, but we'll be realistic, and we won't try to do things where it's not welcome and where we have to do it in the wrong ways in order to do it. One of the principles we always try to follow is to act lawfully and to do things in ways that are above board and through the front door. And so, we're patient too, and we have plenty of work to do without trying to do things that are, being, underhanded or, sneaky. So we don't count it as a failure. We just count it as, a long-term project. It's more similar than it's different. I would say that the basic two principles are exactly the same, and it's to focus on the mission of the center, which is to try to focus on religion and the rule of law, to stay in the lane of law. We're lawyers, and by focusing on law, we can do a lot of good, and to focus on freedom of religion and belief for all people in all places. So that's the mission. And the second is relationships. We try to be good to each other within the center, and we try to be good to the people with whom we work and interact. If we build good relationships and if we stay focused on our mission, then I think we will be okay. And I think those are principles that Cole has always really understood, sort of in the depths of his being. And there are things that we continue to try to do and model. And so The bottom line is, I think that we are on a trajectory of continuation more than we are really on a trajectory of innovation and change.
I'd agree. I think the way we do things hasn't changed at base. It really hasn't. I think one thing that has changed, though, maybe, is just sort of perspective. I know Cole has said this before, too, that when he started, he thought this was a unique moment in time, right? Berlin Wall had fallen, and the Soviet Union fell, and there were all these opportunities. And when I came on, that's mostly what we were doing, was working in Central and Eastern Europe. But over time, it became really clear that issues about law and religion, issues of religious freedom, these are things that are just at the heart of so many things in a country. Identity, community, relationship with the divine, relationship with each other. And they're not going to be settled anywhere permanently. And there's always challenges. I mean, I still work in Central and Eastern Europe and learn from the wonderful friends I've had there for 25 years. But now our operations are much more global, and we have that sort of scope of, maybe another way I can explain it is, one thing we've seen over the years too is one of the things we can do, given our position and the fact that we've been established long enough, is to be able to help lift and support scholars throughout the world, right? To build this as a field, to build people who will have credibility and knowledge and skills that they can use in their own countries to make it a better place. Because they can do what we could never do, right? We're always going to be Americans. We're always going to be people coming from the outside. And we want to support, we've supported whole networks in Africa and Latin America of scholars that come together annually. We've supported individuals and encouraged them. We've had training programs. We have the Oxford Young Scholars Training Program that, has a crop of 15 or so young or early career scholars from around the world, trying to help build this as a field, right? Seeing a responsibility and an ability to serve that's a little wider of a view maybe than when we started.
This is a field that is very dynamic. When Cole started his work, it was hardly a field at all. And now it's a field with journals, it's a field with chairs, it's a field with centers in various countries on various continents. It's a field with conferences that are international in character, regional in character. It's a field that's growing. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that the field of law and religion, the need for scholars who are committed to religion and the rule of law, scholars who are committed to freedom of religion, scholars who are committed to the principles of understanding the relationship between religion and human flourishing, between religion and society, between religion and who we are as human beings. I think it's a growth industry, and so I think there's still a lot of opportunity. I think it's still a field that is not exactly in its infancy, but still in its adolescence. And so I think there's going to be a lot of growth and development in the field of law and religion over the next 10 and 25 years. And I think it will be still a very dynamic and interesting field at the end of our lives. I don't think it will be an old and decrepit field. I think we will be old and decrepit long before the field is.
Yes, I agree.